What's up, guys? Nate here. I filmed a collection of videos at the start of 2018 about just music albums. This was a definitely a very interesting time in my life when I was recording these videos. I bit off a lot more than I could chew. I, for some reason, thought it would be feasible to try to review every single album that came out in 2018. The way I tried to balance it was the workload. The way I tried to balance the workload is that I would literally just set my camera up and I would press record and literally would just say whatever came to my mind about the album. I didn't think any of it through. I didn't make any kind of blueprint or plan or write any kind of script. Nothing. I would literally... One review in particular, I remember, I think it was Diablo Swing Orchestra, the review for them that I did. I literally immediately, like after I got done listening to it, I put my earbuds down, I came down into my basement where I record a majority of my videos, and I just talked about it without, like, with almost no buffer period. I'm definitely playing around with the and I definitely I think the lack of planning does kind of make me sound a little pretentious. I listened back to some of the reviews and I'm just like, oh god, I don't know. I'm trying too hard to be Anthony Fantano. I don't know. The point is that I'm revamping the series at the beginning of 2019, but a couple things. One, it's only going to be positive reviews. Like, I'm only going to talk about albums that I like, and two, it's going to be a lot less. I'm not even going to pretend like I have the time or energy to try and talk about every album of 2018 or of any given year, because, like, even listening to every album from every given year is just a ridiculous feat. I am proud of the videos. I am proud that I was able to, like, it was the longest, like, string of time where I had just consistently made videos and not stopped. So I'm very proud of that. But I decided, since I am going to be revamping the series and making other videos, I'm just gonna condense all of the reviews that I made in that short span of time into one video, which is the one you're watching right now. So enough of my blabber mouthing. Let's get right to the video. Enjoy. When I first heard about Bro Job, I didn't have much of a reaction, to be honest, because I didn't really... It was just kind of laid out in stone already, you know? Looking at the album artwork, knowing exactly what I was getting, this sort of parody version of a deathcore album, metalcore, post-hardcore album, whatever you want to call it. And I don't think that this thing even managed to strike a chord with its main fan base. That's just how unneeded this album really was. In terms of music, it just... There's nothing even remotely redeemable to me about the entire process. It started and ended as one giant breakdown. It makes Chelsea Grin look like Dream Theater. That's just how long and drawn out this thing is. And then on top of that, all of the guest vocalists, I guess you could say, on this thing. Are they even guest vocalists? I don't even know, because, I mean, a lot of them are on the same songs. A lot of them, so, like, I don't even know, like, who is actually a member of the band and who is a feature and who is a guest vocalist. It doesn't really nowhere can you really even find out, I don't think. And if you can, like, does anyone even care? I don't. The album artwork, if you look really closely, is just sort of a collage of all of their hate comments that they've received on YouTube, which loosely translates to all of the comments they've received on YouTube. And, I mean, okay, is it ironic? No, it's not ironic. Just because you took all your comments and you put them on your album artwork and it makes you seem all, oh, yeah, we just do what we want because we don't care and because, you know, we just write silly, stupid music and some kid's laughing in his room or whatever, you know. I mean, did anyone think this was funny? Like, did this make anyone laugh, really? Is this anything that hasn't been done before by some, like, YouTuber somewhere on the internet, you know? Like, is this not something that Jared Dines has done, like, 100 times better, might I add? You know, and I mean, maybe the lyrics are funny. I don't know. I mean, at one point I thought I heard someone say something about throwing up cereal. Ha 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 ha. My thing personally is that I don't personally I don't when I listen to an album, I'm more interested in the music than the lyrics. If I'm gonna look up the lyrics, then I need to be interested in the music in the first place so that I, you know, feel like it's worth my time to go and look up the lyrics, you know? Very rarely is it that I will pay attention to the lyrics first. And so maybe it's my fault. Maybe the lyrics are funny, you know, and I just wasn't listening hard enough. But here's the main problem. I couldn't understand any of them. And don't you be that person either who was just like, oh, I understood all the lyrics. I knew what they were saying. No, you didn't, okay? You did not. First of all, you didn't listen to the whole album. Be fucking honest. Second of all, you did not understand. You did not turn this thing on and then just immediately hear as if clear as a bell all of these lyrics, okay? You had to go on to a damn lyric site. I don't even know if these lyrics are even available on the internet or if they ever will be, if anyone's even going to care to put them on there, but it's just not going to happen. I don't know. The production on this thing is just garbage. Just to give you a little bit of perspective into that, my phone was having problems recently with bass. Like, I noticed as I was listening to Spotify that there was a lot of bass going on. I couldn't figure out what it was, and then I turned on my laptop and I listened to music on there, and I realized the problem wasn't there. I turned on this Bro Job album on my laptop, and I thought the bass problem was back again. The drums were so... The kick drums were just so obnoxiously boosted up to nothing, as if this is going to be an album that you're, like, playing in your car or something like that with your bros or whatever. I don't know. I found myself constantly turning the volume up and down on my computer just because at some points it seemed like it was getting quieter, and then all of a sudden I could barely hear anything, so I turned it back up, and then all of a sudden there was the bass again, and it was a struggle, man. It was a struggle. Maybe I'm just thinking too much about this, you know, maybe I need to just let it be what it will be, but, I mean, this album was supposed to be funny, and it's just not funny. It will put you to sleep. I mean, look, if you're into 45-minute long breakdowns, I mean, by all means, go fucking nuts and jam this thing all you want. Whatever, I won't judge you. There was even 2 clean choruses. I think there were only 2. There might have been 3. I'm not sure. At 2 random points in the song, or the album rather, and they just... they just came out of nowhere, and you know, there was really no rhyme or reason for their structure or their, you know, the melody was strange on both of them. Yeah, I'm not gonna waste any more of my breath on this thing. I think it's pretty clear. It's not funny. It didn't even hit home with its main fan base. Let's just forget that it ever happened. Cool, cool. When it comes to punk music or pop punk music, either one for that matter, I've sort of found that there's just a lot of sameness going on. I've personally felt like when I listen to a punk album or a pop punk album, there's just a lot of sludge going on. You know, you'll listen because you like a band's overall sound and you like, you know, maybe at one point there was a clean chorus that hooked you, or there was a certain energy that the band gave off that really captured your attention and made you react a certain way. But I just don't feel like when you put every song together in the context of an album, as of late, not all the time, but like as in the past year, you know, the kind of the punk or pop punk albums that I feel have been coming out have sort of kind of been a little bit more on that, like just kind of plotting on the guitar, you know, sort of side. With 2018 just beginning, Jeff Rosenstock dropping his album Post, which apparently is a surprise album. Like, it wasn't announced or anything like that. I didn't hear anything about it until it came out. That trend has been shattered in my mind. this this is an album that I very, very much hope can be a trendsetter for many punk bands to come. Where do I begin with this thing? This album sort of very professionally, very, I guess, tactfully takes a lot of different feels and almost perfectly layers them out. You have your songs, you know, you're just you're powerful, crunchy, but at the same time, you know, energetic, woefully bashful. Is that even the right word? I don't know. You know, there's just an energy to them, you know, and they're easy, you know, power chord songs, but they just get you going. And Jeff Rosenstock's voice on these particular songs sounds emotional, but not whiny. For instance, if you've ever heard the song Your Graduation by Modern Baseball, you know, that song is, you know, whiny, but it's a kind of whiny that people have, you know, sort of gravitated towards and, you know, come to like. But you still can't deny that. I mean, it's almost undoubtedly over the top in a sense. Jeff Rosenstock kind of airs up towards that boiling point, but doesn't manage to quite hit the top of that kettle, you know? He's almost there, but it's that perfect balance. And in those, you know, powerful moments on the album, it really, really helps to, you know, bring it all together. There's just a certain feel, aesthetic almost, that Jeff Rosenstock has that a lot of the more polished young punk bands these days seem to kind of lack simply because of any really interesting story to tell or anything like that, so they have to draw from what they know. They have to sing about, you know, breakups and girls and, you know, teen angst, you know, and stuff like that that we can all relate to in some way, shape, or form. Most of us, anyway. But Jeff Rosenstock, you know, he's aged well. It's very obvious that he's had more time to meditate on these ideas and, you know, provide these very, very energetic, seemingly timeless songs in a way that you know, doesn't make you necessarily want to relate to what he's saying, but almost makes you want to stop and listen to what he's saying, as if there is wisdom in what he's saying, and you can sort of take it and apply it to yourself instead of being on the same level as what the singer is saying and being like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I relate to that very much. He seems to have a sort of old soul, but at the same time mixed with a very angsty young soul, and it's an awesome combination. It's not all power. There is one song with a piano intro that just feels like this perfect echoey interlude to all of the energy that's been thrown in your face from that point on. And it sounds great, you know? It really, you know, backed by Jeff Rosenstock's crooning, ironically about not being able to play the piano very well. Um, and it sounds awesome. It sounds absolutely awesome. And scattered throughout the rest of the album are a couple other different, you know, finely placed softer moments, like at the very end of the album. He basically just has this sort of echoey fade outs that lasts, I think, like 4 or 5 minutes long, and sounds very emotional, I have to say. It being, you know, having this album being a very sort of emotionally jarring experience, and then sort of having it flatline for a little while, giving you almost time to reflect on everything that you've heard from the beginning to the end. Overall, this is a very well produced effort. I don't feel like this was haphazardly thrown together in one, you know, by any stretch of the imagination. And ultimately, this is just a great listen, and I think it has great replayability. I'll probably be returning to this thing quite a few times throughout the year. I hope I can come to love this thing even more. Give it a listen. I think you'll like it. Author with the album IIFOIIC. I don't know if that stands for anything, if that's an abbreviation of any kind, I don't know. I'm also saying it now before I forget what it's called, because I've had to look it up several times. But anyway, this is a band that I have never heard before going in and just listening to this thing cold turkey, and I have to say, I'm very impressed. I've been giving this sort of pop rock sound a very much seemingly undeserved chance throughout the past couple years. You know, no album like this has really come out and, I guess, wowed me in a very long time. And this one didn't necessarily wow me either, but it definitely has some elements that I've found lack in a lot of today's sort of pop rocky kind of sound. But this album is strangely hooky, poppy, yet technical at the same time. Take, like, Paris, the 1975, War on Drugs, Kian. Like, mix it all together, and you have this really sort of all-encompassing modern sound, you know? It almost takes all of these elements of modern music, the pop hooks, you know, the sort of showy, kind of show-offy technical drumming, and maybe a little bit of you know, chill sounding chill wave, is that what you call it? You're gonna flame me in the comments for saying that, but you know what I mean. It really is an all-encompassing thing. It did sort of sound like maybe it needed a bit more fine-tuning, like all these elements like sort of just popped up in different songs out of nowhere, and it maybe could have had a better, flow from one song to another. All the songs kind of felt very disjointed. But that is a nitpick. I did feel like every single song on this album was its own powerhouse in its own right. And that's not something that happens very often with a pop rock album. You usually get a lot of filter with pop rock albums, but I did not feel like there was one single weak song on this entire thing. I did maybe feel at some points the vocals were a little blah, maybe towards the beginning, but that was very short-lived because at one point the singer just went into this crazy falsetto that almost sounded like the lead singer of Emarosa, which was really cool. And it from that point on, I almost didn't even care about the vocals anymore, It just kind of all came together and the vocals and the music just blended so beautifully. This is good. And it's good because I finally think I've heard an album of this style where it seems to take the rules that, a mainstream pop rock industry of music has laid out for artists and just throws them all out the window and just makes its own goddamn album, which is absolutely amazing. And although I do think maybe with future releases, it could be a bit more fine-tuned. I know this is a young band. I know this is a band that's up and coming, I believe. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement. But again, there's not really too much besides the disjointed songs that I can really complain about. So a very good release by Author here. I'll be looking at this band very much in the future. I hope they keep with it. I don't know if you've ever wanted a hip-hop group that just encompassed almost every conceivable type of artist that currently exists out there. That seems to have almost like no conceivable agenda or statement musically, but maybe in a social sense, quite a few of them. If that's what you wanted, then you're in luck because Brockhampton is here. This trinity, I guess you could say, of albums, Saturation 1, 2, and 3, are quite an experience. Saturation 1, I have to say, is probably my favorite. I should mention before I dig into this thing that the first song I ever heard by this group was Jello, which I think is true for quite a few people, and that's off Saturation 2. So going into Saturation 1, I was definitely expecting something a bit more along those kind of like bouncy, sort of sing-songy, kind of playful, that just had playful atmosphere, but that was not what I got when I played track 1. I got something like these like industrial sounding, dirty, gritty beat instrumentations, and just one of the most evil hip-hop sounding things I've ever heard in a very long time. In terms of the beats and the instrumentation, it is just so expansive, and it covers so many different areas that I was mind blown. I actually think that the lyricism itself almost takes a backseat to the beat production, and that's not a bad thing by any means. And by no means are any of the rhymes inferior or anything like that. Quite the contrary, you know. I just don't think that it's until later on that, you know, the personalities that each of these individual rappers had was solidified until a little bit later. For now, it just seems like this group is interested in solidifying themselves as a group that can write music. Write some really good music. There's some huge, just insanely intense crescendos. There's some very, very drawn back moments too, but at the same time, there never that this feeling of unease never seems to go away. Whether it's an intense feeling of unease or very somber and quiet feeling of unease. You know, you feel tense, but it's a tension that you want to grow because it's so intriguing and it's such an experience from beginning to end. Yeah, there's quite a bit to absorb with this thing, and I am really, really looking forward to digging deeper into this one in the future. Yeah, perfect first album from in my opinion, perfect group. Immediately following Saturation 1 is its sequel, Saturation 2. Now, this particular album was my introduction to this group. And while Saturation 1, as I had mentioned in my last video, was just a really intense, uneasy feeling that was intriguing to you and made you want to dig in deeper, this one, while definitely not in like a parody sense or in like a jokey sense, it has a bit more of an easygoing feel to it, I feel, you know? You can even tell from the two different album artworks that there's just a different feel to this one. There's a bounce. There's just an undeniable bounce to like every single one of these songs, which is amazing from track 1 till the very last track. It doesn't even matter what kind of instruments or beats that they're using in any of these songs. It seems like that bounce never seems to go away, and it's really cool. And it's also in this album that I feel that each of the individual rappers definitely they definitely, I think, establish themselves as personalities. The only way I could describe this group of rappers is almost like that one character from Codename Kids Next Door, whose name always eludes me, where it's just like all of them combined together. You know what I mean? It just like seems like so many unlikely personalities that would never meld come together to make this really interesting piece of work. You have one of them with like the braggadocious, just hard-hitting rhymes of Kanye West. You have one of them that kind of has that like sing-songy sort of jokey little playful rhyme that Nicki Minaj had on that one verse in Monster on it's the Kanye West song. I forgot his damn name. You don't feel like there's any wasted personality or potential listening to this entire thing. It really is quite a spectacle to behold. That's not to say that this album is without its really intense moments. For instance, the song Teeth is one that never fails to impress me in just the way that it has this chorus background and the socio-political rap topic that he's rapping about just seems so fitting, and it melds and works together so perfectly, and I love it a lot. I definitely feel like if you're more of a classic hip-hop head, like if you're more into, you know, the Tupacs and the Notorious B.I.G.'s of the world, or, you know, the Wu-Tang Clans of the world, then this might be more of a pick. This might be your favorite of the three. It is by no means a bad album, and I have several songs in this album that I will be returning to quite often throughout the remainder of my life. Who knows? And then immediately following Saturation 2, Saturation 3. This one is definitely, I feel, kind of the anomaly of the three. This is actually one that I actually had to re-listen to. I listened to this one twice just because I kind of felt like I sort of zoned out the first time I listened to it because it was such a drastic change from the first two. This is definitely, I feel, for lack of a better term, one of the more raw, the most raw release of all of them. I think it shows that this group definitely isn't afraid to show their, I guess, show a truer shade of themselves, and definitely, I definitely feel that the subject matter of what they're talking about takes precedence over everything. The beats are stripped back, and it's all about, you know, even like any kind of like particular style in terms of rapping seems to not disappeared necessarily, as we'll get to in a little bit, but it's definitely taken a sort of backseat to just the subject matter, you know? Talking about dealing drugs, and one of them talking about their homosexuality, or their inclination towards liking men, and, you know, just a lot of very personable, very surprisingly relatable stuff to me. This may not be too hard to believe, given that I'm currently living in a house as a white suburban male with a record player right behind me. I don't even know if you can see, the album cover might be covering it. Whoops. In any case, I'll be honest, it's hard for me to relate to a lot of things that, you know, rappers talk about sometimes. You know, I love, personally, oh jeez, I'm about to sound like a fucking idiot, but the Notorious B.I.G. album, Ready to Die, is what it's called. I love that album. It's one of my all-time favorite hip-hop albums, but I can't relate to anything that that dude is saying. It's just a very raw album, and that's why I like it. But, you know, it's gonna sound cheesy, but with this, you know, with a lot of what they're saying, I can understand it, you know? You know, being bisexual myself, I definitely, you know, it's just good to hear a rapper being so outspoken about his homosexuality, you know, and being a part of the LGBT community. And hearing just all this relatable stuff, I really like it. Now, like I was saying before, not the whole thing is, you know, not the whole thing is like an emotional poetry telling. The first two songs paint a very, very different picture, and it's almost kind of shocking how intense the first two songs are, and then just the change that happens from that point on. And there are a couple hard hitters, you know, maybe like one or two scattered throughout this thing, but after song 1 and 2, it's mostly just kind of softer stuff. But anyway, songs 1 and 2. The first song, there's the one verse rapped by, the only way I can describe the way this guy, or girls, honestly, voice sounded was like a mix between Danny Brown and the villain from Who Framed Roger Rabbit when he turned into that crazy psycho cartoon character.
Remember me, Eddie? When I killed your brother, I talked. Just
It was amazing. I loved it. It was the only time I heard that voice on the entire album, so future releases definitely bring that back. really the only way I can describe this atmosphere in the beginning is like Pee Wee Herman's Playhouse from Hell in like the best way possible. Um, but yeah, I think that's about all I have to say on this particular album. Even though it does have quite a bit of relatability and, you know, some really standout moments that were even more intense, I feel, than quite a bit of the material on the first Saturation album, which is saying a lot because that one was intense. Um, I still feel like I might have liked just a little bit more substance to the beats, maybe. Just a little bit more oomph to them, but that's a nitpick, honestly. I don't think that either of these three albums, not this one included, are bad by any stretch of the imagination. I definitely feel that listening to this entire trilogy is worth your time. If you have the means, go listen to the whole thing. You'll like it a lot. Whew. Cupcake with E4 Eyes. Well, where do I start with this thing? Um, for starters, oh god, I have to give this thing credit where it is due. For starters, to this thing's credit, it does it's a very creative way of expressing your like for sex. Okay, like I don't know if there's any other way to just come out and say, man, I love sucking dicks, I love fucking dudes. Hell yeah, let's party. You would think, given Cupcake's image and I'm assuming backstory and respective life choices and personality, that she would be more of a personality on record. Um, but I kind of felt like she almost. Okay, let me backtrack for a second. A lot of the rhymes, especially on the first half of this thing, are some of the silliest rhymes I've ever heard. She's she's talking about like some dude cream pieing her and the cum acting like a conditioner. That was probably my favorite line. And then something about like getting fucked long and hard like a limousine. Like what the hell? Um, there's no shortage of lines like that. But so my point is that it's very, very silly, and it has this sort of like alternative, unforgiving, in your face, you know, this is who I am, fuck you if you think differently lifestyle. But it feels very inconsistent because she also talks a lot about just, she also questions, seems to question her life choices a little bit, like on certain songs on this record. Like there's no like give or take. Like certain songs are about like I love being a whore, you know, fuck you if you think differently, and then other songs are like life is hard, you know, do what's best for you, or you know, what am I doing with my life? Should I change? You know, there's really no in between. The very first song is about self-empowerment, you know, so it's kind of interesting to just hear that and be like, oh yeah, all right, I feel good for myself, you know, this hard hitting, you know, rap voice telling me to be good to myself, and all of a sudden the next song's about sitting on dudes' dicks. Like it's just like, whoa, okay then, interesting. In terms of beats, I feel like maybe this thing had the intention of going super, super hard, but there's two problems with that, with how it was executed. Number one, the trap kind of click sounded obnoxious and terrible. You know, it's just bad. And number two, I almost feel like these super bass boosted beats. She was almost having a hard time like producing the intensity that was required for, the beats outshined her almost in a way. They overpowered her, and it was very noticeable at quite a few points. And one more big complaint is that it's very top heavy, this album. All of like the fire lines, if you want, if you will, are at the top. Like the first like 4 or 5 songs, and even that sounds generous. And then and then for a lot of the rest of this, it's just the same. No variance in beats or anything like that. For like 4 songs, and it's just the same intonation that you hear all over the radio with all of her rhymes. Not really bringing up any new points or anything like that, just kind of rehashing what she said in previous songs, and it just feels like a lot of filler. Ultimately, I feel like there is a personality here. I think that there is a shock value that still has the potential to be brought out of this performer, but I don't think that she's reached that point yet. I think she still has a lot of work to do to get to that point. I think she certainly has the following to help get her to that point. And I have no doubt that, that this is like not a front. I mean, of course, there's always doubt to be had, but I mean, whatever. I feel like if the act is true, eventually the genuine, raw, relatability will come out, and it will, shock people, piss off the conservative parents, and will get her to the heights that she needs and probably wants to be. So, keep working at it. Is it my thing? Not terribly. I'm sure the only other time I'll be listening to her is if she does manage to reach this level of notoriety. Other than that, I think I'm going to take a pass from now on. Black metal is a very, I don't want to say new genre for me, because I have been listening to it for, I'd say, about a year now, but it's definitely kind of I guess it's a sound I'm still sort of trying to understand what it means to me a little bit more, because it feels to me black metal is such a unique style of metal in contrast to, every other kind of metal, if that makes any sense. Like, every other kind of metal, whether we're talking about like thrash or death, even metalcore or power metal, they all are so heavy in terms of production. They all take up all the available sonic space, you know what I mean? And it's just in your face, and it's heavy, and it's raw, and it's brutal, and it's awesome, right? But black metal is different because it retreats, It doesn't need that full space in order to, get its message across, or, have its identity or prove its point. It lulls, and it churns, and it moves, and it grumbles, you know what I mean? It doesn't just come out and, scare you right away. It works, and then it comes out and scares you. But so that's why when I listen to black metal, I really like just the most, how do I say this? I like the most echoey, ethereal sounds that you can get, because that, to me, captures the, if you can be ethereal but yet cold and evil at the same time, there's just a power to that gets to me that I can't describe. With Watane's new album, I feel like I got that effect sort of in a sense. Um, at certain points, I feel like when it's slowed down, particularly on the very last track, that almost mayhem sounding crunch to the guitars, and then the lead in to the actual song was exactly what I was looking for. It was great. But I almost feel like the reason that that part had such an effect on me was unfortunately just because of how much of a drudge the rest of this thing was. I'm not, of course, dissing the musicianship. You know, I think it would be very easy to tell if a black metal band was bad at their craft to say, you know. So in no way am I dissing the musicianship. It just seemed like there was not a lot. There wasn't a lot of change. There wasn't a lot of switch. And I just felt like the entire time I was just listening to this one long droning on sound, which is some people's cup of tea, but not necessarily mine. I like a little bit of variety. I'm sorry. I just, when I listen to one thing continuously, I I I I, I can appreciate it if it's a sound that I'm really really into. But just the blend between atmosphere and power just was an okay balance. It was enjoyable, but it wasn't really a balance that I would say hit me the way that I like to be hit when I'm listening to black metal. Now, if there's something that I'm not, because I fully am open to the fact that maybe I'm just not listening for the right things when it comes to black metal, because it's a fairly new genre to me. So, by all means, in the comments, let me know. If there's something I'm missing or something that I should be listening for, let me know. Ultimately, yeah, I think that's kind of all I have to say about this one, unfortunately. It was an okay listen. Hopefully this band will spice it up, I guess, a little bit on another release. But if not, that's okay. You know, I get that that might not be the kind of band that this is. And, yeah, that's about all I gotta say. Sinistro. This is a band that I just recently was introduced to upon scouring the internet for new albums to listen to. Quite happy I found this group, to be perfectly honest with you. I like I said in previous video, I like a little bit of variety with the metal type music that I listen to, but if I like the overall sound that's being given off, then ultimately I can go for it. You know, it's something that I'll be able to latch onto and listen to. This is one of those records. I wouldn't say that by any means it blew me out of the water. Parts of it did seem maybe just a little, how do I say this? Parts of it seemed to drag on for maybe a little bit too long. Like, the kind of drone that this album produced was good. I would even say great, but not amazing. But, I thought it was really interesting how this album was able to juggle the two genres of doom metal and what seemed to be post-rock of some kind, and really just kind of melded together in this really interesting experience. You had your songs, your doom metal type songs that were not necessarily heavy, but gave, you know, the album its moments of, you know, fullness, like when you needed that boost of when you needed that boost in your ears, if that makes any sense. It really delivered. And then you also had songs that, and it kind of just creeped, the post-rocky songs kind of creeped up on out of nowhere. Like I was just kind of listening to this thing, and all of a sudden, there was maybe like one, two, maybe even three like doom metal-y type songs in a row, and then all of a sudden I just realized, oh my god, this is not even a doom metal song I'm listening to. This is like this like post rock kind of feel. Just really pretty little guitar arpeggios being played. Almost felt like I was in the middle of like a fantasy lands. It was it was great. And very interesting vocals too. Very cryptic, very mysterious, very, I would almost say seductive in a way, in like a sort of a in sort of an endearing kind of way. Um yeah, I this is an interesting group that I would definitely say that I has me intrigued, has me wanting to hear more, and I don't even deny that this group could even experiment with maybe some other genres within the metal realm or the rock realm. They seem to definitely be able to take, these two very extreme genres and kind of make them sound almost one and the same in a way and make it their own. Yeah, this is a very cool project that this group has put out, and I hope we're able to hear more someday. With certain albums, I definitely tend to try to remove my expectations from them before going into it. I like to give every single album its fair share, or its fair chance rather, so that I don't have too high of expectations for it. Why do I bring this up? Well, as I was looking for albums to talk about for these videos, decided to look at rateyourmusic.com, and this particular album, Summoning with Doom We Come, was listed as the second best album of 2018, behind Frank Ocean, before it even was released, surprisingly. And even though obviously, I think it was just people who were already fans of this group, pouring their support in for them in a kind of weird way, but nevertheless, they're pouring in their support, but it somehow had this expectation kind of latch onto me for a really good album, and it was kind of hard to remove that. So, keep that in mind going forward as I start to talk about this thing. But this was a great listen, despite the expectations. These very old death metal inspired guitars, maybe something you would have found on an old oh Jesus, what's the band? Obituary. Something you would have heard on an old Obituary record. Very tribal sounding drums, and tribal vocals in a lot of parts of it, and a melodica that you might have heard on, Black Sabbath Master of the Reality, all came together for a very, very atmospheric listen. Just looking at this album artwork while listening to a lot of these songs just kind of made me feel like I was like in the middle of like a cold mountain or something like that, taking this like long journey. Inspired a very somber and but also sort of warm feeling, I suppose. I always use this term whenever it comes to, you know, like black metal or melodic death metal or anything like that, but the drone that this album produced was amazing. I mean, I'm a huge Obituary fan, so those kinds of like really buzzy yet also echoey and punchy, pokey, stingy, however you want to call it, that guitar tone sound will always hit me hard, no matter who's doing it or how they're doing it. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that this album inspires any sense of doom or anything like that, which is okay. I would say it's very, again, somber, kind of uplifting in a way. It feels like this album very very slowly in its like hour and 7 minute time span, like creeps up to a crescendo that the very last song just really like was milking like quite a lot, and it worked amazingly, I have to say. Yeah, a very very inspiring listen. And I'm very much looking forward to more releases this band may put out in the future. I even think it's worth. I can definitely understand why people might say this is one of the best of the year so far. Because well, it is good album. Shining was one of the artists that introduced me to black metal, I would say. I'll never forget. I looked at a list of a list of albums on loudwire.com, and I think it was the top 50 or top 25 or something best rock and metal albums of the 21st century, and one of the metal albums by Shining was on that list. I can't remember which one. I know it's like the album artwork is like him like really close up to the camera and this like really dramatic pose, but or some person. But anyway, I listened to that album after looking at that list, and I enjoyed it, but it didn't necessarily click with me necessarily. I would say until I listened to this album, this Shining album right here. The description that Loudwire gave is that, you know, I don't know what this guy's name is, who is basically the mastermind behind this project, but the pain that he's gone through is just undeniable. Listening to everything on record that this man puts out, his voice, his guitars, the drums, everything just seems to reek with his pain. And it's in your face, but it's also it's a disaster you can't look away from, and it's amazing. And that didn't really click with me until I listened to this record. I didn't believe it at first, but it ultimately is the truth. And on top of that, this this guy or this band, there seems to be no subgenre within the metal frame of reference that they cannot pull off. I mean, two of the songs on this album were covers. One of them was a Placebo cover, and one of them was a cover by someone I've never heard of. But it almost didn't matter. Maybe the last cover sounded maybe a little out of place with the rest of the album, but it wasn't a bad cover by any means. Like, I mean, for God's sakes, it almost sounded like they were going into this sort of new age Peter Murphy, The Cure type style almost, which is unheard of from a metal band. I would say so. That's insane. And it was interesting because this album opens, and it shocked me because it was like this sort of like thrashy, almost like metalcore death metal type sounds that you would hear from a band like Kvelertek, and I just wasn't expecting this like really heavy head-banging riff like to open this thing up. And it kind of had me thinking more like, huh, really? But it worked. It just worked because he played around with it, and he, put his voice over it, and there were movements with it, and he made it his own. It wasn't just there for the sole purpose. Not saying it wasn't there to make you bang your head, because obviously it was, but for the sole purpose of banging your head. He used it as a tool as opposed to the groundwork, if that makes sense. And I mean, there's a piano interlude, a beautiful 2.5 minute piano interlude on this thing. And yeah, this album was absolutely incredible. It blew my mind. I wasn't a huge fan of this band. It's not that I didn't like them, it's just that I never really had, just one of those bands that I hadn't gotten too much into. But I think after listening to this one right here, I am officially a fan of Shining. I mean, it's going to be hard to top this one. It's going to be hard to top this one. Good luck, 2018. You got your work cut out for you. King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. This is a group that I just heard of for the first time last year in 2017 with the announcement of their album Flying Microtonal Banana. I had absolutely no idea what to expect going into listening to a group like this. The only frame of reference I seemed to have was the expectation that people seemed to think they were good. I didn't do any previous research into what they were like. I didn't know anything about them, so I pretty much went into this album cold turkey. And I'm happy I did. I'm not a musician. I'm a singer, if that counts in your book, but I am not a musician. I don't play any instruments. So when it comes to what I perceive to be an instrumental album, I don't necessarily dig into it in terms of its technicality or its or maybe it's or the little subtle instrumental tricks that maybe musicians use to impress other musicians, if that makes any sense. That's not to say I'm not impressed by good musicianship or that I don't see it when it's there. It's in a more basic sense maybe. It's just that when I listen to something like this, I more or less just get the feel for it as opposed to dissecting it in a music theory way, if that makes sense. But nevertheless, there are so many bands that I heard listening to this King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard album. So many influences, like some songs felt like they just had that cool kind of classic rock take you get from something like The Strokes. I almost heard I heard something like a homage to Jefferson Airplane at one point with this really drawn back bass that seemed to just kind of go off in the distance. I mean, some of the technicality you get from a band like Tool, but at the same time, it didn't seem overtly technical, like the band was trying to show off their skills or anything like that. We'll get to that on later Gizzard releases. Just the psychedelic is what kind of took over here. You know what I mean? I mean, the first track, Rattlesnake. I think for literally the first 4 minutes, all they say is rattlesnake. So, I mean, clearly the theme around the rattlesnake, if you will, is being built around the instrumentation and relies 100% on that, which is interesting. I like that. I like when that's attempted. And I think it was done well. I would almost call this thing like a Tame Impala album if it focused maybe a little bit more on riffs and a little bit more song structure as opposed to just, you know, going full on out psychedelic and just trying to, you know, make us guess what instrument is even playing, like on a Tame Impala album like Lonerism, for example. That's really the best way I can describe it. And one more point, I absolutely love the production on this thing. Like I'm listening to, you know, a rock album from the 70s, you know. No strings are being pulled, you know, no tricks, you know. This is not a producer's album, this is a musician's album, and this is an album to get high to, honestly. It's an album to get high to. I wasn't high when listening to it, but I kind of wish I was. Wow, just, yeah. If you're into this, like, 70s, you know, psychedelic rock kind of style, and that really just raw production, you know, that you, would have got on, like, a record by the Police, even, maybe, then I think you are going to like King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. A very good album to start off the year for them, and there were a couple more to come, so stay tuned. Murder of the Universe is another record that King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard released in 2017. It really is interesting how all of the albums that this group put out this year have a definable stamp, but still are completely different in terms of their approach. This one in particular, I was very clearly a concept album, and that's obvious from the get-go. It throughout this entire thing, it seems like, or it doesn't seem like, it is exactly the fact that they play around with this guitar riff the entire time that seems to only stop maybe like twice or three times to establish some kind of dialogue between characters, but there's this really like almost like James Bondy feeling guitar riff they have going throughout this entire thing, and a female character. Like, okay, so let me backtrack for a second. This album is split up into 3 discs, if you will. I'll call it 3 movements, because that was more what it was like listening to it digitally. The first movement was this riff that I was talking about, and a female character, which I think was some kind of supposed to be some kind of a apocalyptic monster. And it's okay. But I feel like it tries too hard, honestly. It tries a little bit too hard to be conceptual. Like, I feel like when this band went into this, you know, went to write and record this particular album, they maybe had the idea of a concept a little bit too heavy in their minds, and that filter may have buffed out a little bit of their creativity. Surprisingly, this album is a little bottom heavy. Like, a lot of the good stuff is closer to the bottom, as I'll get to in a second. But yeah, the first movement was a little for me. Second movement kind of continued with that theme of the first one, but it started to, they started to slowly work in, I think there was like one more character that they worked in, and it got slightly more psychedelic. Not a lot, a little bit. Little synth, sprinkled with synths here and there, and it was also a little bit better than the first, but I enjoyed it too. The third movement is where things got really interesting for me personally. There's the introduction of another character, this like robot. I think it's unfair, to say that this is a nod to Radiohead and OK Computer, but it really felt like that's where it got its ideals from. You have a robot. I'm gonna call it a robot because it had that like androidy voice that you'd use on like a text-to-talk app, and that seemed to maybe be learning to become human throughout this entire thing, and ultimately the psychedelic features kind of came back in full force, and there were just little synths everywhere, and it almost felt like we were back to flying microtonal banana again at some points, but with like even more just crazy psychedelic instrumentals just being pumped from every direction as this robot was monologuing, and that was honestly the highlight of this album for me. I'm not going to say that the album built the tension very well, but because I mean it's not necessarily a tense sounding record, but it felt good at the end. It's just what they were doing. It was feel good. It was like in slightly just intense enough, not too intense, and it was a pretty good conclusion. Overall, with this whole thing in mind, I almost got the vibe of like some old like some like classic Pink Floyd or something like that, like even before Dark Side of the Moon or The Wall, like almost like their very very first record, if that even like at some points. I don't remember what their Pink Floyd's first album is called, but it kind of had that vibe a little bit. Overall, I'd say this is an okay album. I just feel that it was shoved through this filter of concept album, and I feel like that really really hurt it in a way. I feel like if they had not even gone for the whole concept approach, they might have had something like a better yarn to work with, but the way that they worked all of this around, the concept that they were portraying here, I feel like it might have been dulled just a little bit. But it's still a pretty enjoyable listen, and if you're a fan of Gizzard, then you'll probably like it. Polygon Dwanaland is another album that King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard put out in 2017. Again, just the Gizzard, with every album they put out in 2017, just took a different approach every single time and put out a unique record every single time that still had their undefinable stamp on it. With this one, that's no exception. This one kind of feels like it was sort of in the same vein of Flying Microtonal Banana, but where Flying Microtonal Banana was focused more on just using their technical ability to create, a soundscape and an atmosphere sort of reminiscent of, 70s psychedelic rock. This one takes that technicality, and I feel like it makes it the main focus on this particular one. This one is very much a musician's album, a musician's album through in and throughout. That's not to say that it's lacking in its emotion in any particular way. I don't think it's quite as emotionally grabbing as the first or even the second one, but it certainly has a lot to listen to. There's a lot to absorb. This is gonna sound kind of strange, but I almost feel like there's two bands that I heard in my head listening to this for some reason. Tool and Pinback. Like, the technicality of Tool and the guitar tone of Pinback were like two features I heard most prominently. I would liken this particular album more to a guitar album, like maybe something by like Joe Satriani, Surfing with the Alien, as opposed to, you know, Flying Microtonal Banana being more along the ilk of like a less psychedelic Tame Impala, if that makes any sense at all. But I mean, I enjoy guitar albums, bass albums like this for what they are. It's just I, not being a musician, don't really have much insight to give aside from the fact that, you know, I listened and I emoted, you know, to I fixated on the guitar and listened and emoted, and I feel like I reacted the way I did when appropriate for myself. And based upon, you know, that emoting that I was doing, I feel like it was okay for me, but not great. And I wish I had more to say about this, because I know there's more here. But that's really all I have to say about this album at this point. I might give this another listen, just to maybe absorb it a little bit more, because there definitely is a lot to be absorbed here. That's undeniable. But I feel like maybe you have to be a musician to be able to absorb it. And I'm not. So maybe I'll listen to this again, maybe I don't. But if you're a guitarist or a bassist, go nuts. I think you'll enjoy this thing very much. Diablo Swing Orchestra was never really a group that I had taken too seriously, if I'm being perfectly honest. It's not that I thought that they were a bad band, or anything like that. It's just that they were never a group that really kind of grasped my attention in a way that made me think, oh, you know, they're here as a strong force making music. Why do I think this? I found them among a chat room, believe it or not. Someone had played one of their songs, and I liked it a lot because it seemed to be this really kind of interesting fusion of I don't know. It was just one of those like one of those kitschy things where, you know, oh, it's swing music, you know, and it's a quirky thing, and we're all dancing and having fun. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I also found the song to be really intelligent and just an entertaining bands to listen to. And now we have their most recent record, Pacifisticuffs, and I don't know that I'm really a fan of this, to be honest with you, because there just seems to be a lot of well, first and foremost, this whole record, it really doesn't seem like this band has necessarily figured out what it is they want, because this record tries to be so many different things. It tries to be this symphonic metal thing. It tries to be a swing, a swing jazz thing. It tries to be metal at some points, you know, it pumps these little metal parts into it every now and then, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, it doesn't feel like there's a clear direction going in any which way. And I also found the label avant-garde metal attached to this thing, and I mean, okay, I guess. I mean, there are certain points where it almost seems like this thing like slows down and takes a more classical approach, as if you were sitting in a symphony hall and listening to them play. And yes, there are little moments that seem like they're a bit more avant-garde, but it definitely feels like there's a clear motive with this thing. It definitely feels like there's something going on here, an image they're trying to put across. So I feel like saying that this is avant-garde is almost an excuse to say, yeah, we're just going to do whatever we want. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel authentically avant-garde. It just feels like an excuse to say, oh, we can just do whatever we want, and people think it's avant-garde, and we can, yeah, do whatever we want. That's not to say that this is by any means a bad record in terms of musicianship. It's actually very tight. Like, this is like swing jazz music that I could kind of get down with a little bit. Some of it does kind of have that whole like Donkey Kong kind of feel to it, actually, like Donkey Kong or Diddy Kong swinging through a forest. But other moments it does kind of have it's got this danceability to it that I like. If I had to give the biggest thumbs up, it would definitely be the moments where it focused 100% on swing and didn't try to pump any other metal category into it. Because I have to say, especially with the very the first track was god-awful in my opinion. The moments where they try to combine the metal and the swing, it just did not fit together. It sounded like two completely different sounds colliding in all the wrong ways. Which is interesting because with past songs, they've managed to fit these genres together, not perfectly, but a bit better. This time, I don't know what happened, but it just seemed like there was no correlation between the two genres. Ultimately, I am still intrigued with this group, and I do want to hear more. I want to see them develop more, because I think they definitely have something. But let's steer away from this whole metal direction. Let's try and figure out what exactly it is we want to be, you know? I almost felt like I was listening to this, like, I don't know. It seemed like there were too many influences, ultimately, and these influences all collided, and it made for a very disjointed listen. And I'd probably like something a bit more cohesive and honed in with future releases. Ooh, all right. Francis and the Lights. I just don't know that this kind of music is for me. To be honest with you, I see the value in it, and I can understand where someone might be into it. I certainly think it draws from some very interesting influences. Depeche Mode, for instance. I kind of got a little bit of a Depeche Mode vibe on this record a little bit, but in some areas. But there were only two songs on this entire thing that I even remotely liked. I think it was the second song, kind of had that, was an interesting, energetic pop song. And this other song in there had this kind of interesting drum beat going on that I was able to finger tap to. But the rest of it is just boring. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. It's not poppy enough and energetic enough to be entertaining. It's just boring. And it's also not chill just because the songs are not energetic. They just end up coming off as bland. Just completely bland recordings. And I can't find anything of value to them, you know? This whole thing just seems like something a group like Depeche Mode would have like started off with. You know what I mean? Like, this record is what Depeche Mode listened to and thought to themselves, "Oh, okay, let's build off of this." You know what I mean? This is just. Like, tell me in the comments if you disagree. I'm very willing to re-listen to this and hone in on some certain part of this if you believe this is of any value. But this is not fun. This is a boring record, and I really have nothing else to say about it other than that. Black Rebel Motorcycle Club really sounds like a group that I should like. It has all the makings of a band that I could really get into in theory, you know? A lot of different assorted rock genres that I feel like when combined together could really do something interesting, you know? Garage rock revival and a little bit of power pop here and there. And it's a, you know, it's a lot of different styles combined. But I've never ever been able to get into this group, and I've tried, but I can't get into them that well. One of their old songs, "Whatever Happened to My Rock and Roll," was recommended to me, I think, on Pandora or something like that a while ago. I just couldn't get into it. I don't know what it was, but I decided to give this new album a chance. And I'm still not convinced. I'll be perfectly honest with you. First and foremost, this was like if Arctic Monkeys took their like 2013 album. I can't quite remember what that one's called. It's like if they took some of the melancholic moments on that album and just drudged them out completely. You know what I mean? And that was most of the record, to be perfectly honest with you. This record was like 80% just kind of like smooth, and never really felt like they caught any kind of groove at all. It just kind of felt like a lot of mud happening. And I mean, it was interesting in a sense that they changed up the instrumentation a lot, but it just seemed like it was all focus on, maybe they're too focused on building atmosphere with instruments and didn't really focus on writing any kind of hook or and really any song technique at all. You know what I mean? And the instrumentation alone was not interesting enough to warrant there not being any songwriting. You know what I mean? Whereas, take a band like King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, maybe, when they go into their instrumental passages, they have a lot going on, and it's very enticing and intriguing to hear what they're doing. So you can tolerate it. You even like it. That's kind of the point. But here, it's just not entertaining enough for me at all. And then on the songs where they do kind of, you know, get a little bit more energetic, the guitars, man. Oh, God, the guitars. I don't know what it is about just the way that they're produced, but it crunches and then it shrinks. Like, oh, man. Like I almost feel like if they gave guitar a little bit more priority on those like faster songs and maybe turned the volume or the gain up a little bit on those guitars, you'd have a much fuller, richer sound. But they just kind of fade back into the distance, and with songs like the kind of songs that this band writes, the guitars need to be the driving force. I feel like if you don't have a good riff to like get everybody moving, then what do you have really, you know? And I don't know. I'm just not a fan of this group, honestly. They haven't released anything that I've been a really big fan of. I'll keep my eye on them, see if they improve at all, but right now I'm not convinced on this group at all. So if for any reason you've been watching my channel for any extended length of time, there's something you've probably noticed. I'm a young guy. I'm currently 21 years old right now, and I am reviewing music that not a grand majority of 21-year-olds like. Now, obviously, that's a generalization, you know. Obviously, there are 21-year-olds that listen to all different kinds of music. I get that. But there are certain artists that tend to sort of, I suppose, just appeal more to people who are older than 21, you know? Gen Xers, let's call them, you know? Not millennials. And I don't want to use that as an excuse for what I'm about to say. What I will say, though, is that in my defense, I don't think that it's fair to say something like you don't understand what you're listening to just because you didn't exist during the time that this artist was in their heyday. Because, I mean, you could, with the age of Spotify and Apple Music, you can always go back and listen to whatever the hell it is you want. So, I've heard Surfing with the Alien by Joe Satriani, and I kind of use that as a mirror as for when I was listening to this most recent record, What Happens Next. And obviously, they're two very different records, two vastly different time periods. I'm not about to, you know, review what happens next based off of the merit of Surfing with the Alien, because Surfing with the Alien was incredible, and you know, I'm not about to try to make this new one live up to that album, considering there were a bunch of albums in between those two, so that wouldn't be fair. What am I getting at here? Joe Satriani is considered by many to be a guitar god, you know? I mean, my god, he taught Eddie Van Halen, if I'm not correct. He taught Slash, or at least mentored them in guitar playing in some way, shape, or form. So he's had quite an impact on a lot of the classic rock world in terms of guitar playing. I didn't like this album, okay? I did not like this Joe Satriani album. I'm listening to an album like Surfing with the Alien. It seemed like every time Joe Satriani touched his guitar, he did something with it. He made the guitar talk somehow. He was just able to take you on a journey with just his instrument, you know what I mean? This one, not only did I feel like the production on like the backing instruments, like the drums and the keyboards and a lot of other stuff was just lacking and felt like it was kind of, you know, like obviously it's Joe Satriani. They're going to give guitar the priority when it comes to production. But it shouldn't get the only priority, I felt. You know what I mean? Like, the guitar only sounds good if all the other instruments sound good. Like, if I'm listening to a band where the singer is the star, which is most often the case, and the rest of the band sounds like shit, even if it's the best singer on the goddamn face of the earth, it's not going to make any difference because the rest of the band sounds like shit. This is the case with this Joe Satriani album. Joe Satriani sounds good. Like, doesn't sound bad by any stretch of the imagination. And the musicianship isn't the problem. It's just the way it's produced. You know what I mean? Like, with a lot of the drums, it felt like it was clipping at certain points. And it just seemed a little lazy at points. And, now, that's pretty much all I have to say as far as, the rest of that album was. Let's talk about Joe and his playing. He doesn't stick to one thing. That is what I will say. On this particular album, he's not satisfied with just doing the same thing over and over and over again. But listening to this, I just couldn't help, like, with certain riffs, rang, you know, just sounded familiar or sounded recycled in some way, shape, or form. Now, it wasn't like blatant or anything like that. It wasn't like, oh my god, I've heard that riff before so many times. It was more like, yeah, I've heard that before, but where have I heard that before? You know, and that's fine, you know? I wouldn't even necessarily consider that a knock on his playing. But I feel like the great guitar albums are the ones that where you're listening to it and it's just like, holy shit, I've never heard anything like that before. Now, I know that's a tall order to give to any guitarist, but, I mean, it's Joe Satriani we're talking about here, you know what I mean? I feel like someone who's considered a guitar god, such as himself, you know, it's kind of a standard game you have to play, you know what I mean? Where do your standards lie? And obviously, I'm not expecting him to go full on, like, shred god, but at the same time, I want there to be some kind of balance. And I felt like it was very subpar. It was just very subpar, it felt like just another Joe Satriani playing guitar on an album. Now, that's not to say that Joe Satriani didn't have any big moments on this at all. On the opening track, it definitely did sound like Joe Satriani was digging right into some old Van Halen stuff, you know what I mean? Like, it almost, like, his guitar playing almost sounded like it could have been on the very first Van Halen record. Almost, not quite, you know what I mean? Overall, with all these elements combined, it just felt like elevator music. Like, this entire album just felt like, you know, Polyphia and that one song, Finale. It felt like a lot of that, but a lot less technical and quite and just as elevator-y, if that makes any sense. Of course, I'm going to listen to Joe Satriani's next album if he puts out another one, but this one didn't do much for me. If you are one of Black Veil Bride's many fanboys or fangirls, the newest Black Veil Bride's album, Veil, is not going to change your opinion on them at all. If you are one of the plethora of Black Veil Bride's haters, this album is not going to change your opinion on them at all. It seemed as if Black Veil Brides, with their past two records, have finally found their niche. And their niche is just the most passive music you could ever possibly imagine. Imagine if Avenged Sevenfold went pop. That's what's happening here. There's not a single standout moment on this entire thing. There's not even like there's an 8-minute long song on this thing. And even that whole thing just sounds like it blends in with the rest of everything else that's happening here. I have to give this album not credit, but brownie points in a certain department. It definitely didn't go for what I'm going to call the plague of Bring Me the Horizon. What is the plague of Bring Me the Horizon? When Bring Me the Horizon put out the album That's the Spirit, tons of bands went down that direction. The past two Asking Alexandria albums have suffered from that immensely. And just a bunch of bands have just come out and that were previously like post-hardcore or metalcore have come out and just went in that direction simply because it is the way that the trend is moving, or because their album, or they're not their album, their label has pushed them to do so. This album, thankfully, did not follow that trend. Whatever. Doesn't change the fact that this thing is just completely bland. It doesn't feel like their guitar solos or like their guitar playing at all has really evolved much since their very first record. You know, there's kind of like the same guitar solo you would have heard on the song In the End, even on Knives and Pens or something like that, and it just feels like another Black Veil Brides album. And I really think that's all the talking points there are with this thing. If you like Black Veil Brides, you'll like this album. If you don't like Black Veil Brides, you won't like this album. This is not going to change anything. We're all going to move on with our lives, and our opinions on Black Veil Brides are not going to change. Someone might as well have farted, and no one would have noticed. The end. Avatar has been a group that I've had on my radar for a little while. They're definitely not a band that I knew had been around for as long as they had been around, and also were as popular as they are, you know? But there's something kind of interesting about what Avatar does, because more and more, I feel, as the years go by, more and more bands are coming out and trying to make themselves into what I like to call an aesthetic band. I think a perfect example of this is the band Motionless in White, if you've ever heard of them. Motionless in White's most recent record from 2017, Graveyard Shift, I feel established them as a band that wasn't necessarily trying to write music. They were writing music, obviously, but they were focused more on the image that they put out than the music that they put out, which I have no problem with. A lot of people have problems with that, but hey, if the aesthetic is interesting and it's endearing and something that makes me want to look deeper into this band, then fine. You know what I mean? More power to you. Avatar is one of those aesthetic bands I feel that doesn't slack in either department. You know what I mean? They have their characters, they have their image, but at the same time, they write some killer riffs and they write some killer songs. Now, if I have one complaint with maybe some older past Avatar stuff, maybe they're a little bit too cheesy with a little bit of their storytelling, which I think is a trap that a lot of other metal bands, like symphonic metal bands, kind of fall for, even though Avatar is not symphonic metal. It's kind of the same ilk, I suppose. But with this most recent album, Avatar Country, that cheese completely disappeared, and it was just replaced with 100% pure metal energy. I'll be perfectly honest with you. This is just a powerhouse of a record from beginning to end. Yeah, I don't know how else to say it. Just killer riffs. There was one song, Statue of the King, which I absolutely loved. I will say, though, one thing that confuses me about this group is their inclusion of harsh screamed vocals. Seems to be a little out of place at times, although I feel like with this album, they kind of cut out a little bit of that chaos. Like, if this is how much like chaotic weird energy they had on another album that made no sense, it maybe was like shrunk down to something like that on this album. And it's interesting and confusing at the same time. It's hard to describe unless you listen to them. It's like they have a feel, an image that they put at face value. That image doesn't move, but they're just playing these awesome metal songs over it. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's kind of hard to rectify the image and the music that's being played, and it's hard to lump it in a category. It very well could work as two separate entities, and that's honestly okay. And, I mean, I can't end this video without talking about the 3-minute interlude where they're talking about the king having an enema. I don't have anything to say about that. I just felt like saying the king had an enema in this video, so there you go. Now you have that. If you listen to the album, you'll know what I mean. Yeah, honestly, just a killer metal album. And I'm intrigued. This group has finally, I feel like, caught my attention. You know, my attention with this group was sort of scattered because I really wasn't sure how to pin them down. And, well, now, I think I'm intrigued. I don't feel like I have to pin this group down anymore. I don't want to really pin this group down, to be honest with you. I'm just intrigued now. And I'd like to see this group live someday. I think that'd be a lot of fun. And, yeah, Avatar. Awesome release. So Anderson East is, well, first of all, I saw that this artist had, close to 1 million, followers on Spotify, which I think is pretty significant. And after listening to this, full record, Encore, that came out this year in 2018, I can't help but almost be proud of the guy, because he's really deserving of a title like that. This dude has got an absolutely killer voice. He's got so much soul, so much grit, and it's absolutely amazing. His voice definitely has the energy and the charisma to sing about really upbeat and happy topics, like, partying and drinking. But then he also has this really reserved kind of sweetness to his voice as well, for when he's singing slower songs and more passionate songs. He's really able to deliver it. And he's not a diva either, which is an amazing thing. I feel like his vocals were specifically produced so that every time well, first of all, aside from the production, he's able to, when he goes into like a higher register, when he goes into a higher note, first of all, he doesn't do any runs, um, which is like the antithesis of being a diva. And second of all, his voice just, I don't want to describe it as gritty, because like his voice is gritty anyways, but like it changes somehow when it goes into a high register. It's like a shriek almost, but like a very, very like passionate um like shriek right from the soul, and it's amazing. It did remind me a little bit of Sam Smith in The Lonely Hour, but this was way better than that, because there wasn't any weird random pop like instrumentals anywhere. This was very specifically blues instrumentals, and that was great. Every single song here, both instrumentally and vocally and lyrically, I think worked. Not a single one of these songs felt out of place, felt like filler, felt like they, you know, every single song felt like it belonged. And this is also one of those albums that doesn't necessarily need any kind of flow. Like with some albums, you definitely feel like from one song to another, you're just like, whoa, what the, well, that makes no sense, Um, I guess what I'm actually trying to say is this flowed very well. um, but yeah, Anderson East, man, absolutely killer voice. When I first turned this thing on, it hit me right in the soul, and that was not something I was expecting. I just could not help but just kind of do one of these, and it stayed with me for a lot of the album, and that's not something I take lightly. That's definitely something that made a lasting impression on me. So I will absolutely be looking out for more Anderson East's releases in the future, if they sound anything like Encore. Tonight Alive is really a band that I feel has just gone through so much transformation since the day that they started. From being just another pop punk band with a female vocalist that a label was trying to pump to no end, to the band's sort of leaving that aside and coming more holistic, I suppose you could say. And then more and more as the years go by, it seems like they're finally, I guess, starting to realize who they are as people, as musicians, and what their role is in this insane music industry. With that being said, the most recent album, Underworld, surprisingly seemed to take more after one of the older records, as opposed to the newer direction they went with their the last record before this one. That's not entirely true, but it's mostly true. There's definitely so many just pop hooks, pop choruses, and every single song here, a good portion of the songs here, I should say, just are really uplifting. That is the main theme. Like, every song here tries to be as uplifting as it possibly can. That is one of the main themes. Positivity, I suppose you could say. But I feel like it works for me personally with one song. Like, if I listen to a song like "Crack My Heart," which was one of my favorites here, I would love it. It's got that perfect soaring chorus, and I like it a lot. But I feel like in the context of an entire album with like 12 Crack My Hearts, it's okay. But it just, I feel like the effect is more widespread. How do I say this? The effect that "Crack My Heart" gives, or any given song on this album, the effect that it gives is not is almost more effective than listening to the whole album, if that makes any sense. I mean, if you're looking for specific lyrical themes and you're very interested in the story, that or the history, or the personal anecdotes that this band is giving, then okay, yes, then maybe the album is more for you. But I feel like if you're only going for the emotional effect that the song itself gives, then one song works better than the entire album, which is strange, but it's true. Really, in terms of this whole album, it was really a toss up between really, really energetic, not energetic maybe so much as just really, really happy and uplifting pop, to really just kind of watered down pop songs. I almost felt like I was listening to like someone like Sarah Bareilles at some points. It just felt like radio, like something you would hear on like contemporary radio, and it was just kind of bland. That was closer to the bottom, but a lot of other songs just had that energy, had an infectious energy to it. And I feel like that really is the saving grace of this album, is just the infectious energy from a lot of these happy songs. And I have to say, I really am a sucker for Jenna McDougall. It's just something about her voice. I don't know what it is. But it can be raw and energetic and punchy at points, and then at other points it can be it can also be sweet, and just very, very sweet and soft, and she has control over it very, very, very well, and I like that a lot. Were a couple studio tricks used on her voice? Sure, but it's not necessarily distracting in any way. Overall, I think this is a good listen. I don't know if it has much replayability, but I think the only replayability you're gonna get is out of someone who's a big fan of this band. But it's definitely worth your time, I think, if you're looking for some happy, uplifting pop songs. If that's your thing, then go crazy. I think you'll like it a lot. How long is too long to wait before in between albums? I think close to 40 years is a little telling. Skids with this most recent album. Now granted, I'm not familiar with this band's back catalog. I have not listened to much of anything else. But I'm assuming by the way this most recent album sounded, I'm fairly certain that the older albums probably sounded a bit different from this one. Oh boy. Oh man, where do I start with this thing? The vocals, first and foremost, for the most part, were just awful. Absolutely awful. I mean, it was hard to tell if this group was trying to like do things with their voice and just be quirky about it and, you know, try to put on some kind of flair when they're singing, but oh my god, it didn't work if that was the case. But I'm inclined to believe that that was not the case, and it was just the fact that their voices have aged and that they sound absolutely awful on here. Oh god. And it's with the very first song too. It's like the immediate impression that you get. Not only that, but this album has no idea what it wants to be. It doesn't know whether it wants to, you know, keep the traditional post-punk label that this band had previously had. It's not sure. The first song was like a modern rock you would have heard on something like just like a rock song you might have heard on something like the first Third Eye Blind album or the Green album by Weezer. It the very last song was like a country song almost. Like it was just this acoustic guitar and the singer just singing with like a twang in his voice, which was completely out of the blue from everything else that I listened to. Some songs were okay. I think at this album's very best, you know, you might have got like I said, something along the lines of like Weezer's Green album. Like that was the album's best, and that was only a couple songs. It did, I guess, if I could give this album one thumbs up, it wasn't afraid to experiment with not only with the experimentation was mostly done with guitar tones, but it didn't feel like it melded in any sense of the direction or any sense of the word. It just felt like two completely different entities just randomly strewn throughout this entire thing. Yeah, and the signs of aging definitely show. It seems like this album and this band tried to keep with their previous roots, but at the same time kind of try to move into a modern age, and there are a couple decades in the past and in the future. They're just all over the place with this thing. Oh man, it's kind of a shame when a band comes back after, you know, in between a span of 30 and almost 40 years and puts out an album this bad. But there is just no denying that this thing is a travesty, and unfortunately I don't have much else to say about it other than that. Hussy with Hitchens. This is the first album by this guy in 5 years. This album really is proof that it really only doesn't take much to make music that is just emotional, raw, and just simple, but yet effective. That really comes from the heart. Hussy just lays it all on the line here, and really just writes 10 absolutely amazing songs, acoustic guitar songs with very with a very sweet yet I guess kind of desperate sounding voice, and does it absolutely perfectly. Now, I don't think it can be ignored. I actually had my brother listen to this thing, and he said that this guy's voice and lyrics sounded almost exactly like Manchester Orchestra, and that's a parallel that I drew pretty much immediately to. Yes, this guy's voice sounds very, very similar, if not almost identical, to the lead singer of Manchester Orchestra. But honestly, I almost feel like this was better than Manchester Orchestra, personally, because I feel like this kind of very raw, you know, emotionally charged kind of voice works better with acoustic instrumentals than it does with power rock chords being played over it. And this guy is a pretty awesome guitar player too. He there are certain moments when you just get lost. He stops singing, he just keeps playing little ditties on his guitar, and you just get lost in it, you know? You find yourself swaying to it. It's awesome. And absolutely no punches were pulled production too. This was just him and his guitar, because he didn't edit out any of those, or whoever the producer was didn't edit out any of those like little squeaks that the guitar makes, you know, when you play certain notes, and that just added more to the raw nature of this album. Hussey is definitely an artist that I am going to have on my radar for a very long time now. Just a very, very, very emotionally charged, yet relaxing, calm, sweet sounding album that doesn't pull any punches, and is definitely worth your time if you're looking for a very, very, very stripped back, raw acoustic rock, or not acoustic rock, but just acoustic guitar performance from a very effective musician. Corrosion of conformity. Stoner rock and stoner metal are two genres that I find to be very effective in the way that they just kind of go for it, and they approach their craft. It really doesn't take much with stoner metal to just get you going, because really all you need, I feel, is a good, just a simple riff and a simple groove to really be effective. I find that a lot of the stoner metal that I get the most into does this very perfectly. With Corrosion of Conformity, No Cross, No Crown, I just felt like it just wasn't muddy enough for me. It was kind of mixed with this sort of rock and roll kind of feel, if that makes any sense. Like, the best way I could describe this thing would be like if Van Halen did stoner metal. And in theory, when you hear that, it might sound like, oh, well, that's interesting, I want to hear that. But it, it more just sounded like vocals and, you know, sort of a jivey atmosphere using these stoner metal instrumentals, and it just didn't work for me. I felt like the moments where this album actually did get that really dirty, gritty vibe was more during the interludes, and there were quite a few of them. That's where I think this album actually shines the most. There was an interlude that was more stripped back and sounded more like Alice in Chains. I loved that interlude. And and just there were a couple interludes that just were kind of using the guitars to just kind of play these really, really, really low, sort of depressingly melancholic passages that I think worked awesome. But it was the actual songs themselves that I just felt were, I guess, too happy almost. I mean, not happy, but just too rock and rolly, too energetic. It's just a vibe that I don't feel fits with this kind of genre. I don't know. I tried to let it all go, and I tried to just lose myself in this thing, but it just didn't take me anywhere, and I just couldn't get into this thing very much at all, unfortunately.